Perfect. So UX Coffee Social, what skills should content designers have? So the first icebreaker question is kind of the basic one we tend to ask everybody. Basically, what we'd like to know from Smitha and Samartha is, could you give us a quick overview of how you ended up in design and I suppose content design more specifically? Samartha, would you like to go first?
Sure. So I think it has been a checkered and long journey. And I graduated in electronics and telecommunication engineering many years back. And as I was graduating, I was also freelancing for a technical magazine. As a so it was a magazine, covering open source technologies like Linux. And I think we'll come to that theme later, but that's an important sort of thread in my career. So I became a technical journalist first. Then I, started doing joined a startup, and around 2008, I ended up at Adobe, where I was one of the first, in fact, the fifth person of the content team, the TechCom team that we were forming afresh in India. So I spent like 10 years there doing a lot of stuff, but what I did or where I ended up before being a formal design person was actually contributing to building design products. So I was actually, doing a lot of user assistance content and learning content for Photoshop, which I, was part of, for 5+ years, Illustrator a bit, and Lightroom, Adobe Stock, a lot of tools that designers use. So I got to know designers very closely as my target user base before I became one of them. And then, you know, positions in content strategy opened up in India for the very first time. And I took one of them, and I ended up being part of a design, or building a chatbot. So that was a first end-to-end sort of, design project that I executed. And then I landed at Expedia, where I was managing a team of content designers. So Expedia calls them UX content strategists. So many companies do that still, right? So it's like the nomenclature varies across the industry. And I was leading content design for insurance, travel insurance products, assurance, and horizontal areas like checkout and cart and so on. So I think so that was Expedia, and then I landed up at Atlassian, where I'm doing commerce content. I'm leading a team of commerce content design. So that's how I ended up in design. So from being a technical journalist to a content person, doing design products, building design products, and finally here. So I think that has been my journey.
Wow, what a journey. That's really interesting. Very detailed with different sides of it as well. That's really great. Thank you. Okay, Smitha, would you like to give your background too?
Sure. So my trust with design began with my graduation, right? So I graduated in architecture way long back, and I worked as a couple of years designing homes and commercial buildings. And and as a student, I was always attracted to many languages, and English was one of them, right? And when the opportunity presented itself, and there were other situations which led me to just take up technical communication as a career, and I got into writing, technical writing, so to say, the traditional form. And then over many years, I worked in many different domains, right? So networking, basically, and then Adobe happened, and that was the turning point. So I spent around 10 years along with Samarth, right? So and in Adobe, I think I first started off with e-learning products, designing instructional courses, right? So being a part of the product development, contributing to it in many different ways, right? So there was no distinction. So that is the beauty of that organization, right? So we contributed to the UX development of the product, UX messages, UX writing. So at that point in time, these divisions didn't exist, right? And there was a beautiful module that they were coming up with, learning interactions, And that was my first foray into digital experience and what content means in terms of digital experiences that people create. Went on to create a lot of videos, and then moved into web design. So web design products for Adobe started with Dreamweaver, and website design was another area where there was a lot of web content design that we got into. Many different products, many lot of learning content that we developed. Adobe Experience Design came about the same way, time, right? So I was part of the product from its beta stages, and there were a lot of iterations. For people who have worked in Adobe XD, they know that it was released every month, right? So we contributed to a lot of getting started content there. And then I was also part of the in-app messages and notifications that went as part of the product, along with learning content. Now, with this, Adobe had already got onto a stage where it had a very strong design community. And as part of the customer experience team, we started building experiences and engagement for the community itself. And I up leveled as a content strategist, got to do a lot of structural content strategy, bringing the community together, ensuring that the right content is displayed to them, building portals, experiences at that level. And about a year back, I joined Walmart, and again, another change in my career. So here it is a very different challenge altogether, right? So the scale of the company is huge. It is very challenging, and yet at the same time, there are a lot of opportunities. I'm the sole content designer here in IDC Bangalore, and currently there are various different products, both associate facing, which is like internal facing ads that Walmart associates use, and also external customer facing ads. So the retail industry, is that we are waiting for the next disruption in terms of omni-channel strategy at Walmart, and I think it couldn't have been better for me in terms of career to be here where I am.
Thank you. That's so interesting. You both have very interesting backgrounds, and especially sort of coming from a slightly different starting point as well. It's really cool to know about. Perfect. Okay. That's a really great introduction. So let's get into the kind of main topics of discussion then. So I think the first one, and probably the most kind of obvious one to start with, is around, like, can you give us a bit of background on what content design is and how it's maybe different from other disciplines that may be seen as similar? I'll let you decide who would like to go first on this one.
I'll let Smitha go first.
Okay. So I think most of us know what UX design is, right? So I think more than content design, we have heard about UX design. So, which is basically designing systems to offer great experiences for our end users. And it is, it is coming together of many disciplines. Like, you can talk of interaction design, usability, accessibility, right? So a lot of other things. Now we can look at content design as crafting content experience, right? From drawing from the same definition. And the focus is definitely on information, right? What, why, when, where, how. We want to display information to our target users along their customer journey when they're using a solution or a product, right? So that, in a sense, is content design. So essentially, content designers are involved in designing as much as designers do, and are also thinking of the experience end to end, right? So that is what I would define content design as. Someone like to add?
Yeah, sure. So I think that's a very sort of nice segue to so thoughts I have here. So I think content design. When we define content design, we have to place it in perspective. We have to place it in relation to what other disciplines of content are, right? So you have various terms in the industry. You have UX writing, you have content design, you have UX content strategy, you have tech com, you have information architecture, you have content writing and website authoring. All of these are allied content professions, and many, many more. I mean, even medical writing, all sorts of professions, right? So I think uh, content design, the way I sort of differentiate it from certain other disciplines is that uh, So what is experience at the end of the day? Experience is pixels plus words, right? So the words part of it is really content design. So you really can't have an experience that doesn't have words. There are experiences which might not have words for special applications, right? But mostly you need words to communicate out and to really guide users through that journey that they are taking with the product. So at Expedia, we had a whole workshop to define what UX content strategy was, and that is like the other name for content design we had there. And at the end, we came up with a very simple definition. Content design is the craft, is the science of answering user questions throughout the user journey to make sure that any questions that the users have while they are interacting with the product and beyond are answered in that process, right? Now, I mean, that happens with a lot of other allied content professions also. I mean, even TechCom is like that, right? But I think where content design sort of differs is that the words we write are part of the experience, while for some other allied disciplines, they may be ancillary to the discipline. So users really can't succeed with a product without knowing how to use it, which is what TechCom does or user assistance content does. But the words in content design are part of the entire the part of they're part and parcel of the experience. The second thing that so there are a few characteristics that content design has that again makes it stand out. One is you have you normally have very limited real estate to play around with. We are trying to say the most relevant things in the shortest, or number of words possible. And that makes the process of content design very iterative. So you're constantly trying to say the right things, right? And how do you say the right things? By putting the user in the center, by taking a design-centric approach to content, right? So you're always asking what mindset is the user in at this point in their journey, right? So what is it that they're looking for? What is the question they're asking, and how do I really answer them in the scale real estate I have possible? That is one sort of characteristic that makes content design different. And so before there was content design, the term that many companies still use is UX writing. It in fact predates content design. So how are they different? So I think mostly they might be very similar in terms of what the practitioners do, but it's also a shift in how companies have started looking at this profession. From outside contributors filling in those words into wireframes and designs to designers who create content, who are very much part of the design process right from the onset to throughout the process, right? So it's like content design is a new term, but it has existed as a profession earlier. We've done I mean, many of us who've done content have done it in some form, even though we might not know it, right? But now companies are seeing content as an integral part of the entire design process, and that's why we have this term gaining currency right now. If that answers the question, or if you have any follow-up questions, let me.
That is a very comprehensive answer, from both of you. Yeah, that's very, very interesting. I think there's probably a few questions in the Slido that did delve into this a bit more. So we'll go through the rest of the discussion topics, then circle back to that, because I think there's a lot we can unpick there. It leads us quite nicely on to the next thing we'd like to just touch on, though, which is what skills are hiring managers looking for content designers? As you said, it's not necessarily a new thing, but it's kind of like an evolution of something that already exists. So how would you, write about and perfect the skills that would get you there and get you hired? Again, up to you who goes first with this one.
Okay, I'll get started and then you can probably talk about the recent hiring that you did. Samartha, I think that'll complete it.
Sure.
So there are two parts to content design, content and design, right? So when we speak about content, it's essential that we look at the fundamental skills of writing. So grammatical efficiency or accuracy, and then you have proofreading, for example, or the basic composition of writing, right? So that comes first. And then the next thing that we would look for is the mindset. So the core skills, the content skills are one side, and then you have the the other skill sets that come into play. Um, so basically, having a problem-solving mindset is at the forefront of those skills, right? So user centricity, problem-solving mindset, and that leads to people looking at data and research. So once you say that we want to look at problems, then we also need data to look at where exactly the problem is, and then start from that point onward, right? And researching skills and also analytical and logical mind, right? So because once you know what is the problem, then you definitely need a very systematic thinking to sort of approach the problem in a very feasible way and propose solutions that will work for the users basically, and also weave in the business possibilities there. Now, while we do this, we also have to think of the design side of things. Now, what does that entail? It entails that we have a designer mindset, right? So a good grasp of design theory, I would say, is essential, right? So having a design thinking process, right? So starting from exploration to ideation to defining the problem to actually prototyping as to how the experience is going to be, and then testing it with a couple of users. Now, we may ask, what is there to do in content when it comes to testing, right? So at Walmart, I have tested along with the designers, I have tested content as well. So I have been part of the user testing process where we have sat together, and once the designer has shown the workflow, we have specifically asked content related questions like, what does this mean to you, right? So what do you make of this? And we are in the process of translating everything that is manual to digital, and the vocabulary and the terminology matters a lot. And being remote in these times when we can't really go approach users one to one, it is very essential for us to understand how their world is and what they are referring to, right? So all of these, and then on top of it comes the collaborative attitude and also an open attitude. So basically, everybody thinks that they can write, right? So that is the beauty of language and writing. And everybody has their 2 cents to contribute whenever there is content which is open for discussion. And as a content designer, it's important to listen to everybody's perspective about things, just like a designer would do, right? And then it's up to us to bring alignment and consensus. And for that, we need to have solid data backing why we're doing what we're doing. And once we decide on something, what we famously now call as content decisions. So when we take those content decisions, we must be able to rationalize, right? So document the rationale behind why we did what we did and why is this decision taken, right? So that sets a ground for a lot of other iterations we may want to do later, and also establish the thinking process that has led to crafting even the smallest of the smallest UX message, right? And of course, there will be many stakeholders, because content on UX on UI is a result of a lot of teams coming together, starting from product, business, marketing teams, where we are syncing up with the branding guidelines, bringing the tone and voice together. So, and sometimes the customer support side of things, where we also want to listen to what customers are saying. So at any given point in time, you're interacting with a lot of stakeholders. So which means that negotiation skills, stakeholder management skills are also on top of that. Even for I would say a mid-level or an entry-level UX writer, I think you need to be having that basic skills to manage people and their negotiate and bring everybody into alignment. So that is one of the crucial skills there. So,
Wonderful. I think Smita made a lot of good points about thinking like a designer and applying the design process to crafting content. I think I'll like sort of take a slightly different tangential approach to it and talk about what I watch out for when I'm like talking to candidates and evaluating them, right? So what is it that really makes candidates stand out so it is important because at least in India right now. So when we talk to candidates, a lot of them might not have that formal UX writing or content design title in their current role. They might have been doing that stuff in their jobs, but they might not have. So how do you really evaluate how somebody will scale to this role, right? That's the role of a content designer. So a few things I watch out for are how user centric the candidates' answers are, right? So are they really about the user, or are they really about me? I did so, or is it that the user wanted that and therefore we collaboratively delivered something? That's very important, right? Because there is a trap with a lot of our allied content disciplines that we assume what the users need instead of being user feedback and data driven. So I'm sorry to say that, right? So I think design is firmly not that. So designers have always been doing that. They've always been very, very user focused, right? So that's the crux of design. And the second thing is, even before content designers appeared on the horizon of many corporates, experiences still had words. So who are the people writing those words? They were product managers, who are again very user centric, right? Or they were the designers themselves, or tech commerce and content people who just chipped in at the 11th hour and fixed something or reviewed something, right? So all that happened. But the change with formal content design orgs and roles is that we are firmly part of the process right from the word go, and we have a say on a place on the table to say those things, right? The other things I look for are the tendency to be data driven, be very user feedback driven. Then like Smita said, being iterative. Design is an iterative process, which also means I watch out for a tendency to stick to your own work or really be in love with your own work. I think that's not a good trait for a content designer, because you constantly have to iterate on based on feedback and create variants. Right? I remember we were doing a priming message for one of Expedia's air flight experiences. So when you buy a flight, right? And we were like trying to prime an insurance product on the flight search page, and there were 47 versions discarded, and finally one version we shipped, and that too we tested, and we didn't get very good user feedback, so we went back to the drawing board. So it was not that any of those 47, out of those 47 variants, some were beautifully worded, but it's not about that. It's what the user is thinking and looking for at that point in time, right? And you don't assume that. You really work that out from user feedback and by testing out things and learning from that process. That's what I firmly look for. So I had the privilege of being part of the UX coffee hours initiative for some time, and I've had an opportunity to speak to people from very diverse backgrounds, right from non-profit, somebody working in a non-profit company trying to get into UX writing, to designers trying to understand UX writing and content design, where they don't have formal content design function at all in their startup, for example. And and I always get asked two questions: should I have a portfolio? My answer is absolutely. So designers don't go out in the job market without a portfolio, right? And how do I break into the field, right? So my answer is maybe pick an open source project. That brings me back to my roots, because I built my career that way. So from being a telecom engineer, I stumbled into content because I was playing around with open source technologies and could do stuff with them. So try to contribute your expertise, try to build your expertise in projects that are out there, and therefore build a portfolio in that process, and that will set you apart from the rest of the crowd in the job market.
Great, thank you both. That was again really detailed answer. Thank you for that. So we've got one small thing to touch on, and then we can go into the questions. We've got some good ones in the Slido. Again, if anyone has any questions you'd like to ask them, please put them in the chat or follow the link to the Slido. So just to wrap up this kind of talk around what skills you need. Say that somebody is in a similar role, or maybe they are a designer or that kind of thing you were talking about before. How would someone transition or build upon their existing skills to then move into content design?
Right, I'll take this, Samartha, if you don't mind. because
Sure.
I transitioned, and I didn't know I was transitioning. So that was the best part of it, right? So what happened was architecture trained me, because it is a design discipline. It trained me to think in a specific way, and I could figure out from the day one that I was approaching writing in a very different way, right? So at that time there were no labels, there were no roles, and it was just writing. And over a period of time, as I said, everything, we were able to connect the dots and say yes. So we are applying a lot of principles that we learned as designers into content, right? So always thinking from the end user's perspective, trying to think, explore more, trying and understand the why behind things. What I would suggest is that if you're planning to transition, change the way you're thinking about your work. So most of the disciplines we have out there, be it technical communication, UX writing, or content writing, or web writing, everything at times boils down to just what you have on the table. So everything is sort of defined at times, right? So you just have to fill in this template, you just have to write this particular article, you just have to give me this one line, right? And most of the times we are pressed for either time, or we consider that as our core task, and we are in a hurry to finish it up. What I would urge people to do is to start thinking differently about what writing they're doing, right? And start examining where their skills have to fit in if they're planning to move into content design. So if they make a list of the skills that they're supposed to have, the data driven mindset or research, um, wherever we have worked, I think today companies don't work without basic research. Now it is up to us to reach out to the right people and ask the right questions to catch hold of the research material. Now, at the end of the day, what you would probably deliver may not change much, but what would change is the rationale that you internalize when you're doing your work. Like, why am I doing this? What did I achieve out of this? How am I going to impact the end user? Right, and what is the benefit that I'm bringing to the entire experience or to the business, right? So if you can start thinking in those lines even in your everyday work, you already have made the transition at some point, right? So
Yep.
that's what I would say.
So yeah, I think it's like it's a mindset shift also at some level, right? It's how you approach the same piece of work at times too, right? So a couple of things, like, so as I said, start. I mean, if somebody wants to transition into UX writing, I mean, there are many projects out there where you can actually make a difference, right? You can actually join many open source projects and start contributing your expertise and build that skill set that you are really craving for in the process. That's one. Uh, Secondly, I think reading about design, I think it's a very vast discipline, right? So understanding what design thinking is, trying to apply it to your process, and always being very, very user centric, very customer centric. I think that is the key. I mean, if you start putting the user in the center, you start thinking like a designer, and that's where the shift happens.
And not to forget, right? So we have a lot of books and a lot of courses available. If you just put in these keywords, content design or content strategy. And thanks to UX Coffee Social and other forums like this, where you find people from the community who are out there to help, if you want to have a chat, saying, I read about this. I quite don't know how it fits into the scheme of things, that I'm looking into currently. So can you help me bridge the gap, right? So one question like that, and there are many people who would, come forward and answer it for you. So I think it's just about setting yourself on that path in terms of thinking and also taking relevant actions. And I
Yeah,
think should
I
happen.
think I'll just add one final point here. So on the theme of approaching your work differently, right? So when you're doing a piece of work, any piece of work, are you laying down a brick or are you building a room? Sorry to venture into architecture stuff. I think that's my territory, but still, right? So I think if you start thinking about experiences end to end, how so sometimes I've seen this trap again, right? So you deliver a page, you really don't know how the user is benefiting from it, right? It's just a checklist item somewhere. But if you ask that question, you'll certainly do it differently, that task of creating that page. And if you do that, you're already making a transition that is really required.
Great, thank
And
you.
another important aspect, right? I think we had this discussion. Samarth and I were talking about another project, and then we had a very interesting conversation on long form writing and what UX writing or content design is about. So I think he briefly touched upon it, but I think most of the people who are now transitioning into content design or UX writing have technical communication background, and um, most of them are trained to write instructional content. And the tendency is, the more you talk about a particular feature or a workflow, the better it is because you're explaining it all to users, right? So that is one of the mindsets that definitely should change when it comes to content design and UX writing. As Samarth mentioned initially, one of the things to remember is the real estate, right? And also not to forget the attention span. So when a user picks up a guide or a reference material versus when a user is going through a new UI to accomplish a task, the attention span is definitely different, right? And now, when you want to cater to that attention span and also try and give the best possible information in the most effective way, the words are, I think somebody said, there is no writing, there is only rewriting, right? So it's just uh, the number of times you reiterate and just cut off everything that is not needed at all, right? So sometimes there is a compromise even on some of the grammar rules. I mean, not really affecting the meaning of the sentence, but if you have to introduce a preposition, yes, you do, to bring in the conversational tone to make it clear, right? So, but which, if you look at the style guide of traditional technical writing, people say, okay, no, sentences shouldn't end this way, right? So there are subtle differences and things that people can get into an actual job and learn, but that of course is a major shift if people are coming from technical communication background.
Yes, I think, as you can see, Smita and I don't have much prepared. So that's the conversations being sparked by ideas. But I think what I want to summarize it as is uh, long form content is about, sometimes it's about explaining it all, because what is explained is sometimes a definition of what is supported, especially for enterprise apps. I've been in roles where nothing, so if something is not documented, the customer support would not answer a question about that. So it was that, regimented, right? While UX writing and content design is more about the art of pruning, saying the right thing. So I mean, maybe I'm misquoting, but probably it was Oscar Wilde who said, right? So if I had more time, I would make this letter shorter. So writing short, writing simple is very hard, right? So I think that's where the mindset shift again comes into.
That's a very nice quote to end on. I like that. Great. So what we can do now for the remaining time is jump into some of these questions. We've got some good ones here. So I'll just sort of read them out, and then whoever wants to pick up first, just go for it. So first one we've got here. What are the main challenges that you face as a content design manager?
Interesting. I think I'll maybe start with that. So I think those challenges are not very different from what a design manager would face, right? So at the end of it, it's all about the user, right? So you are building that same experience, and especially at Atlassian and many companies, so you are firmly part of that core group building up product, right? So some companies call it a triad. So triad might be product engineering and design. Some companies call it a quad. So product engineering, program and design. And some companies call it a pod. So I mean, different names, but or squad. But it's like a core group that is part of building that product. So your goals, challenges cannot be very different from what that group is facing at the end of the day, right? So it's about making the experience that simple for the user, making sure the user is achieving what they want out of that experience, and meeting the business goals at the end of it. So that would be one. The second certainly would be, most companies evangelizing the role. I mean, helping content designers be that voice that everybody turns to and listens to, right? So I think that's certainly a challenge. So establishing the functions, that's a challenge certainly that you face, right, as a content design manager, and also building the case for expanding the team, right? So, so how do you really, quantify the value of content design? What metrics would you use? How would you define them? And how would you use them to build the case to augment resources wherever possible, or to deploy them in a way that they are focused on the most pressing priorities that your department has? So those are a few challenges, but I think when design managers face most of them, maybe to a lesser extent the challenge of establishing the discipline, but even that to some extent, I would say. You want to add something here?
Yeah, something similar, right? So what I have faced is, one, trying to bring awareness about this discipline in the company, right? So not many people would have worked with content designers or content strategists, and trying to understand, I mean, trying to up level their understanding about this discipline from just a writer level to somebody who can think broadly and also bring value, right? So that is one of the design, I mean, challenge not for a manager alone, but any content design person today, right? From a manager's perspective, the challenge is also trying to understand how to put this in the scheme of the entire process that is happening. Now, if you have a design process in a company, how do you ensure that the style guide and everything else is followed? And what are the checkpoints you want to put for that, right? So, especially in companies like Walmart, which is like the scale is really huge and there are several different releases happening at the same time, it may not be possible to deep dive into content side of things for every app, right? So how do you then ensure a bare minimum level of consistency, tone, style, right, and voice? What are the things that you would like to put in place for that? Now, if the question is revolving around people management side of things, right? So I think the challenge remains, to find the right talent. As we were saying, we don't have pure content designers that many in the pool. So what we find is people who are ready to transition and are at different phases of that transition, right? So building a solid platform for them, supporting them, and building a community that can support and be supported are some of the things that content design managers are facing today.
Great, thank you both. That was really good to get that insight from that side. Yeah, great answers, I agree. Okay, the next one is around what you were talking about in terms of, you were saying that content designer should have a portfolio. So I've got a question here. What would a content designer's portfolio look like? What would you?
So, um, and that was part of the transition that I also had when I was, thinking about content design as a profession seriously. But I think I would say take or learn from your design counterparts there. Look at some designer portfolios to see what a portfolio really explains, right? So there are frameworks that you can leverage. For example, let us say, if if uh, if you're writing a piece of content, a page, a UX string, whatever it is, right? So it is not just that string, those words. It is how that deliverable solves a business problem, right? So there are like two frameworks I would just leave you with. One is called STAR, for situation, tasks. Uh, you know, there's one more. Give me one moment. Situation, tasks, stakeholders. So that's a secondary one. Situation, task, actions. What did you do, and the results, right? So I think that would be the STAR portfolio or the STAR framework. The second is SBI, situation, behavior, impact. What was the business situation? What did you do in it, and what impact did it create? Again, results, right? So these two you can really leverage to build your portfolio. And there are content designer portfolios out there, including mine. That's a shameless plug. So So I mean, you can take cues from that, but focus on what problem you solved, articulate it well, and then that really becomes your you know case study in the portfolio. A few things you might want to talk about, tone and voice, for example. That's a firmly content design thing, right? Or really, what was the what metrics did you measure against? So were users able to complete an experience better because you wrote things a certain way? What other variants did you test? What did you find lacking in them? Why did you choose a particular variant? That's a very powerful story you can tell in a portfolio, right? So these are a few ideas, but there are examples out there, and it has to be your portfolio in the end, the problems you solve. But leverage the frameworks, look at other portfolios for inspiration, and then build your own.
Yeah, plus 100 for the impact or the result side of things. So that's something that we don't consciously focus on in other disciplines. So, although many companies have made the change to think in terms of key results and what is the impact we're creating and creating metrics around us, but whenever we want to sell our work in whichever form we choose to, I think the focus should be on how did we make an impact, right? So there are several different ways in which we can demonstrate it, giving a thought, starting with whether if it is a web content, then what are the kind of analytics we were looking at, how did you improve them, or if it is a shared goal between business and yourself as a content person, and how did you contribute to that shared goal? For example, how did you make contribute to call deflection, for example, or increased CSAT? Some of these metrics, if you can start thinking in that form, if you haven't been already, that'll add a lot of value to whatever framework you choose, as Samad said, when you do your portfolio.
And your metrics might vary. For example, if you're writing support content, call deflection is a beautiful example that Smita gave. First call resolution. If agents are using your content, are they able to refer to it and really solve customer queries in the first go, right? If you are creating apps for your internal agents or internal employees, so time to completion to a task, whether you were able to cut the time for a business activity from n minutes to n minutes or n hours to n hours. So those are like the stories you can tell and situate your portfolio around.
There's actually a follow-on question to this, which I think it's going to be good to touch upon. So, how do I build a portfolio if I don't have any experience or a relevant experience yet?
That's I've been asked that question a lot, and I think I touched upon it a bit. So uh, if you really don't have any relevant experience, go out there and look at some open source projects and try to contribute to them, right? So I think that would be certainly, unless you're looking at really entry level roles, but it's hard to stand out if you don't have a portfolio again, right? So, for example, if we go out for grad hiring, if we are going out to a campus and trying to hire graduates, so we try to get them to share any samples of content work they have done, blogs, for example, right? Articles in college magazines or anything else. Even I've had people share Instagram stories as examples of their
Yeah.
content work, right? A photo and then a story under that. So if you don't have a portfolio, then you really operate at a level below, right? So you say, you show your language skills and that the fact that you can articulate and express ideas unambiguously, right? So I think that's how you approach an entry level role. But if you're looking for a lateral a role that requires experience, I would say really go out there and try to find projects you can contribute to and build your uh, experience and portfolio in the process. For example, I know just some examples. So uh, some open source pieces of software I've used over the years, OpenOffice.org or Gimp, uh, sorry, Adobe, and uh, then Inkscape or Linux has so many variants, right? And all of those projects are usually short on content bandwidth. You can go out there, volunteer, be part of the process, and learn how things actually happen uh, in the software development world.
A couple of tips here, right? So, if you sign up for any course, content design course or a content writing course, as part of that course, they offer you Keystone projects. Now, how you do those Keystone projects is up to you, right? So, you bring in all of your learnings, not just in the course, but everything else that you have learned around this discipline, and demonstrate it through the project, and use that possibly as a sample project, right? And another thing that you could probably do is, if you're not the kind of person who would want to go and pitch for in an open source project or something like that, or if you're in a hurry, you can just pick up any of the product or an app that you like, and or if you have an eye for it, you've been trying to analyze everything that you're experiencing through the lens of a content designer, something must have struck you somewhere, right? So something that you have observed while you're using an app or something, so just pick that up and do an end-to-end content audit, and then say, these are the things that probably I would improve
I were doing it.
if I were doing it, right? So some of these things will definitely draw interest from the hiring managers.
They're really good ones. They're actually very similar to sort of if you don't have any design experience as well, just like go out and do some audits, or like do work that nobody asked you to do, I suppose is the point.
Can we connect with you on LinkedIn and ask for feedback? Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Anytime.
Okay, so I think we've got time for one more question. Looking at the list, I think we can go with, this might be an interesting one to kind of follow, kind of wrap things up. How has the content design space changed since sort of the earlier days when you first got into it, maybe from when you both worked at Adobe? Has it changed?
Okay, I'll go first this time. So I think and I'll go first because I has already said a few very key points here. So there were no distinctions. There was no formal content design role when we started, really, right? So these roles emerged or grew as we grew in a way. So I remember, if I look back, my first design role was way back in a startup where there was only one content person, one designer. So when I look at my relieving letter from that organization, it says department design. So that was way back in 2006 or 7, I believe, right? So I look back and I trace my design history back to that day. Even I didn't notice it back then, now I do, right? That's one. So I think, we started doing Techcom and instructional content. Then we did a lot of error messages, which again, they are firmly UX content, right? And then UX strings, uh, learning snippets within products, right? So all that we did without a formal UX writer or content designer tag, right? Or that knowledge that we were doing, that stuff, awareness. That's one. First stumbled upon the term content strategy back in 2013 when I joined something called Content Strategy Alliance, which is a really loose group of content strategists who came together and discuss stuff every couple of weeks, right? But I realized that a lot of content strategy that was discussed there was stuff that independent content strategy consultants did. So where they would come into a company, audit the stuff for that company, and really make recommendations as to how the content experience could become better, right? So at that point, I did not identify much with that kind of content strategy because what I was doing was product content strategy and it just didn't know it. So that awareness, that role emerged maybe around 2015, 16, right? So that time around in India. So I think uh, Techcom, content strategy, then UX writing, and then finally I think now content design. So these roles have emerged this way, but also, as I said, the way companies are approaching this role has evolved. So from being words in a wireframe, words in a design, to now design contributors firmly entrenched in the product development process. So that's the evolution of the role itself, that I saw as I grew as a professional over the years. Over to you, Smita.
So I think what I have realized is that the company started realizing that they need someone as guardians of content in terms of UX space. Now, it is one thing to ask a content strategist or a content writer on the fly and say, why don't you come in and edit this sentence for us, versus having a person who is in charge of content from the word go, right? And is responsible for tone and voice throughout. Now, that is something that we started hearing probably around that time, 2015, 14, 15. Around that time, we started hearing about tone and voice, right? So until that point, style was known. We knew that we had to maintain a consistent style, so we were invested in that. But tone and voice is something that came implicitly to most of the writers good writers, I would say, right? And we would still maintain that in our messages. But it is another thing to look at it entirely from the starting the landing screen till the end point, where the entire customer journey that we cover, and maintain that voice and tone. The other important change that has happened in content is the, again, coming to tone, the conversational aspect of it. So with the surge of mobile apps and most of the work happening on the apps, so people got off the enterprise, people got off desktop, and people are now on mobile apps. So the content became shorter and shorter and shorter, right? And also it was important to just have a conversation and become chatty rather than bore them with jargons and everything. So now I think it is bordering on humor that sometimes it's difficult to take across culture. So that is, again, we have to guard against the other extreme of things. So there are some messages which can just irk some of the users, but that's how I can trace the change in content design.
Fantastic. Thank you both for such really detailed and well thought through answers to everything. I think this is probably a good time to wrap up. Thank you again for everyone for joining in and for putting some great questions into the Slido. This is recorded, so we will upload this to our YouTube channel. You can rewatch. But yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Courtney, for having us here, and we had a good time explaining all of the questions and answers. And we would be glad to help if people want to reach out to us on LinkedIn or any other forum. Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Bye.